The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for our community information session related to Olympic Relief High School. My name is Akeisha Craven Howell, and I lead the district's Office of Student Assignment and School Choice. I am joined this evening by Jennifer Holmes, who is our Director of Planning Services. And I also want to thank and acknowledge our board members, learning community superintendent staff, and principals who are joining us this evening as well. Tonight's session will be mostly informational, sharing just some updates on the Olympic Relief High School project, as well as some data just to set context. And then future community engagement sessions will be more interactive, including small group sessions, breakouts, and opportunities for dialogue and question and answer. Before we get started, I do want to acknowledge that for many, conversations about changing student assignment can be very stressful. We all form bonds and connections to our schools, to teachers and other staff, as well as the students that we attend with. I want to commit to you that my staff and I will do everything we can to ease as much of that anxiety and tension that people may be feeling as possible. We are committed to a transparent process where we share information with you when we have it, and we share updates along the way. So our objectives for our time together this evening is just to review the opportunity created by the 2017 bond project, which provides relief for Olympic High School. I want to make sure that we all understand the process which we're kicking off today, and that will ultimately lead to the board's vote on the new school boundary. I want to set the stage for future engagement sessions, which I mentioned before will be more interactive. And then I want to share the intended timeline, including next steps. So what is the process that will start today and take us through about June or July of this year when the board will vote on a new school boundary? The superintendent, through his designees, which is primarily myself and Jennifer Holmes, gathers community input and feedback as a part of this process. Typically, we do about 3 engagement sessions. The first introduces the opportunity and seeks some initial input. That input is used along with a few other factors to develop a couple of different scenarios for what the new school's boundary could look like. In a second session, we bring those scenarios back to the community, and we spend some more time engaging the community in understanding each of those scenarios, but also giving input and feedback on those scenarios, helping us understand any unintended consequences of the scenario, but then also what benefits the community sees in each scenario. Ideally, we'd be able to, with feedback from that second session, narrow those scenarios down to a single recommendation that the superintendent would then share with the board. Prior to sharing that recommendation with the board in a public meeting, we would come back to the community in a third session to preview the superintendent's recommendation and get any final feedback. Sometimes between what is typically session 2 and 3, there are additional scenarios that are created, and so we have to plan another community engagement session. So you can expect a minimum of 3, but know that sometimes that can be extended to a 4th. Throughout the process, your input and feedback not only is informing scenarios, but it's also informing updates to our superintendent and board. Some of that happens informally, but you can also expect at least one public update during a regularly scheduled board meeting, as well as one public hearing during a regularly scheduled board meeting. And during that public hearing, members of the community are able to sign up to speak to board members directly and share your feedback directly. And I will make sure to publicize and share those dates broadly as soon as we have them. There are multiple inputs to the superintendent's recommendation and ultimately to the board's vote. One of the most significant ones is policy JCA, which is the board's student assignment policy. And we'll talk a little bit more detail about that one on the next slide. We've talked a lot about the community input, which is also a part of the recommendation. And then finally, achieving the intent of the 2017 bond, which in this case is to provide relief for high schools and specifically for Olympic High School. The superintendent will make a recommendation to the board for a vote, and we're targeting the June or July timeframe. That recommendation will include the effective date for the change, which is projected to be the beginning of the 22-23 school year. The recommendation will also include any provisions of grandfathering, and it is very typical that anytime we make an assignment change, that students who would be in their terminal grade the year that change takes effect will be grandfathered. So what that means is students who would be seniors during the 22-23 school year would not be affected by the change unless they chose to be. That recommendation will be specific about the new boundaries and also any changes in feeder pattern that might occur. Finally, the 21-22 school year will be leveraged as a planning year. That process is typically led by the learning community superintendent and the new principal once that person is identified and brought on board. But it really is intended to be a collaborative planning time where families and students assigned to the new school have an opportunity to help shape the school's programs and offerings, and we begin to think about staffing as well. So that is the process that will take us from today up until this summer when the board will vote, and then beyond to the planning year. I think it's always helpful to ground our conversations in student assignment policy JCA because it is the direction from the board to the superintendent and to the superintendent's staff regarding how the board wants us to approach student assignment. There's a single requirement in policy JCA for student assignment boundaries, and that is that all boundaries must be contiguous. What that means is that for any school, its attendance area must be captured within an unbroken line. There are also 4 board priorities, which are included in policy JCA. Each of these is equally weighted. They're not written in priority order. In fact, I've been really intentional about listing them here in alphabetical order so that there's not an implied priority. These are all equally weighted. And they do sometimes represent trade-offs. It's often difficult to achieve an improvement in all 4 of these areas for a given boundary, but it is what we attempt to do. And so those 4 priorities are home to school distance, wanting to minimize that as much as possible, intact feeder patterns, and so to the extent possible, keeping groups of elementary school students who attend school together as they move through middle school and then high school. The third is socioeconomic diversity, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. And then the fourth is utilization. So ensuring that we don't have schools that are underutilized and so have excess capacity, as well as ensuring we do not have schools that are overutilized, where the capacity is taxed. Finally, there are some additional factors that the board asked the superintendent and staff to consider. And I think the one that we hear about the most is keeping entire neighborhoods assigned to the same school to the extent possible. But we're also looking at projections for population growth and demographic shifts, as well as what other bond projects might be in the immediate future and have an effect on the surrounding area. We certainly don't want to move the same students more than once in a recent time period. So this is student assignment policy JCA, and I'll probably refer to it every time that we meet because it is the policy that drives all of our decisions around student assignment. So let's get a little further into the Olympic High School Relief Project. It is a new 100 classroom high school. And looking at the map, you can see where it is located. I think you can see my cursor, but if not, you can also see the green dot on the map with the red circle around it. That is the site of the new Olympic Relief School. You can also see on the map the location of the current Olympic High School, and the entire area shaded in light blue represents the current Olympic High School attendance area. You can see surrounding schools that have a tangential boundary. So the Harding High School, which is in this pink color, and then South Mecklenburg High School in purple, and then West Mecklenburg High School in yellow. Getting into the numbers of Olympic and the high schools that surround it, the table that you see right now shows the number of classrooms in each of these high schools, the number of mobile units currently in use at each of these high schools, and then the 1920 enrollment. I am using 1920 enrollment here because the 2021 enrollment numbers are a bit of an anomaly and don't really share an accurate picture of enrollment or how the buildings are being used. You can see then after the 2019-20 enrollment, the number of classroom teachers for that same school year, and then the 1920 capacity utilization, which is the ratio of classroom teachers and the number of classrooms. It does not include the number of mobile units. And then you see the 2029-30 projected enrollment. We did some analysis during the 1920 school year to do a 10-year projected enrollment analysis. We worked with an external partner who used a number of inputs, including enrollment data across all of CMS's schools, live birth data for the county, historical enrollment by school and grade, census data for Mecklenburg County, and then looking at existing building permits, as well as assessing projected development based on available land in these attendance areas and historical patterns of how that land has been developed. On the next slide, I'll show you between 1920 and 2930, just how the enrollment grows over those 10 years. The last three columns on the slide show the socioeconomic status distribution across each of these schools for the 2019-20 school year. In the last student assignment review, the board was very intentional in setting a goal around socioeconomic diversity in our schools. When we developed the district's definition of socioeconomic status, we looked at a combination of factors which, when taken together, can influence the learning environment. It's important to know that these data are aggregated based on census block groups, and they're not specific to individual students which attend the school. The factors that contribute to the CMS definition of SES include household income, family structure, to the extent to which there are more than one adult in the home, the highest level of education of any adult in the home, whether or not English is spoken well in the home, and then the rate of home ownership. And so you can then see in the last three columns of this chart, the SES distribution. When we look at low SES, we are looking at communities where household incomes are lower, highest level of education may be lower, there may be a lower level of home ownership. And then that increases as you move to the mid-tier SES and then the higher SES. This slide shows just a little bit more detail of that 10-year enrollment projection. I thought it was helpful to show this particular slide because the 10th year projection is not always the highest projection. For example, if you look at the blue line on the chart, which shows Olympic, over the 10 years, Olympic is expected to peak in the 2023-24 school year at 2,671 students. So I think it's important to see how that changes over 10 years and not just the 10th year. So as we look a little further at the current high school boundaries and their elementary feeders, you see a little bit more detail on the map. I failed to mention earlier that this webinar is being recorded, and we will post the recording on the website. We will also post this slide deck as well as PDFs of the map on the website, so that if you want to refer to it later, you can have copies of all that information readily available to you. So when we think about building a high school boundary, it's very much built around elementary and middle school feeder patterns. We are going to start with elementary attendance areas because those are the smallest, and we'll focus on those as the building blocks for the high school boundary. So let me orient you to this map a little bit. Again, you can see the shaded blue area is the entire Olympic high school attendance area today. The brown lines represent the elementary attendance areas within the Olympic high school boundary. So you can see Palisades Park, Rivergate, Lake Wylie, Wingate Park, Bearwick, Steel Creek, Lake Wylie, and then a new elementary school that's yet to be named. So we're calling it the New Southwest Elementary School. For some of these schools, you see the name written more than once. For example, Lake Wylie here, and then again, Lake Wylie here. It's a single elementary attendance area, but it represents a middle school split. So you will have some students at Lake Wylie who continue to Kennedy Middle School. The remainder continue to Southwest Middle School, all ultimately attend Olympic High School. As we go slightly north to Harding, and this is just a portion of the Harding attendance area, but you can see that we have Nations Ford Elementary, which today continues to Southwest Middle, and then on to Harding. The actual dot for Harding is off this map. It would be further north. And you also have part of the New Southwest Elementary School, part of which continues on ultimately to Harding, the vast majority of which continues to Olympic, and a small part of which continues to South Mecklenburg. So as we think about building the boundary for the new Olympic relief site, as well as what the adjusted boundary for Olympic will be, we will focus primarily on elementary attendance areas, thinking about the board requirement for a contiguous boundary, so an unbroken line drawn around these school locations. Also thinking about the board goals for home to school distance, intact feeder patterns as much as possible, and so opportunities to perhaps clean up some of these splits where elementary schools are continuing to different high schools. And then also thinking again about socioeconomic diversity. A little bit of data for those elementary feeders. What this chart shows are all the elementary schools that currently ultimately feed to Olympic High School. It then shows for each of those elementary schools where they continue to middle school, high school, and then this number is the number of high school age students that reside in the elementary portion. So let me walk you through that example for Bearwick. Bearwick Elementary School, all of the students continue to Kennedy, They then continue on to Olympic. Within the Bearwick Elementary attendance area, there are 537 high school age students. I'll walk you through for Lake Wylie as well. For Lake Wylie Elementary School, some students continue to Kennedy Middle School. Other students continue to Southwest Middle School. And then those students all continue to Olympic. Within the portion of the Lake Wylie attendance area that continues to Kennedy Middle School, today there are 93 high school age students living in that portion of Lake Wylie's attendance area. When we look at the portion of Lake Wylie Elementary attendance area that continues to Southwest Middle School, there are 297 high school age students that reside in that portion of the Lake Wylie attendance area. And so if you continue down this chart in that way, you can begin to see the number of students in each of the elementary school attendance areas. And remember, it's those elementary school attendance areas that are building blocks for the high school attendance area. And so that's a lot of information and data, but it's important context for us to begin to build boundary scenarios based on your input. And so how will you be able to provide that input? We have a brief survey that we are asking participants to complete. It's about 6 questions. You will need to refer to the boundary maps and some of the data that's in this presentation, and all of that will be available on our website by the close of business Thursday. The link to the survey will be emailed to all the attendees who registered with an email address for this webinar. And there will be a link within the survey to all the information that you might want to refer to complete the survey. The survey link and maps will also be posted on our CMS Planning Services webpage, and then we'll also ask our principals to help us distribute that to their respective communities. Because we certainly recognize that there are people who may not have been able to attend tonight's session who also want their input to be recorded, and we absolutely welcome that. Based on that input, we will leave that survey open through Sunday, April 11th. And following spring break, we will begin to aggregate that data, and it will help to inform a set of scenarios for the relief school, as well as any revisions to school boundaries around Olympic. And we will bring that set of scenarios back to the community for a second engagement session. Our intent for that one is that we would have an entire group session where we could walk you through the scenarios, but that then we would have attendees split out into breakout rooms, which would be facilitated so that you could have a conversation about those scenarios, provide your feedback on those scenarios, and then also ask any questions. And then we would come back together as a whole group to clarify any questions that you were not able to get answered in those breakout sessions. We are targeting a date in late April, early May for that follow-up session. And as soon as that date is confirmed, we will communicate it broadly through our CMS communications team, as well as through the learning community and our high school principals. In the meantime, if you have any questions about the survey or about any information that has been shared this evening, I would invite you to email that to the planning services team at planning@cm12.k12.nc.us, and we will turn an answer around to you as soon as possible. I do see one question in the chat asking, when will the construction of the school finish? I do not have an exact date for that. I can follow up with our facilities management team to get that answer for you, and I will include it in the follow-up information. But I do know that construction is on track for the school to be ready to open for the fall 22 school year. Again, I want to thank you all for taking your time this evening to join us for this kickoff information session. I know it was a lot of information, maps of a variety that you may not be used to looking at, and a lot of data. But again, this session has been recorded and we will post it to our website along with the maps and the presentation that was shared. We look forward to your feedback in the survey. And we look forward to engaging with you again when we have some scenarios to share with you that will be informed by your input on the survey. And we look forward to sharing those with you and getting your feedback and continuing in this process. I hope you will have a very good evening. Enjoy your spring break, and we will convene not long after we return from spring break. Thanks again.